This is In the Black with T. Dallas Smith. Conversations with trailblazers, glass ceiling breakers, and champions for change who inspire and cultivate leaders every day.
For years, the west side of Atlanta was written off. Empty homes, rising displacement, and families pushed out. Then a different approach took hold. One built around land ownership, long-term affordability, and keeping residents in the communities that they helped to build. Today's guest has led that transformation for over a decade. John Ahmann, President and CEO of the West Side Future Fund, is showing what redevelopment looks like when people come first. Welcome to In the Black, John. Good to see you, my friend.
Great to be here, Dallas. Thank you for bringing me in.
Oh, absolutely, man. So, I've been doing these podcasts for a while, and we always kind of focus on real estate and that kind of background. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, John should be on here, particularly around the work that we're doing at the West Side Future Fund. So, full disclosure, I chair the board at the West Side Future Fund, but John gets the pleasure of being the president and CEO for the organization, has been for over 10 years. So, I just want to start off with tell the people who you are, and you grew up in Atlanta, and kind of your love for the West Side.
Yeah, and I'll come back to my love for the West Side is all it's meant to our great city. But I'm an Atlanta native, Grady baby. I know, Dallas, you're at a different hospital. We're both
McClendon Hospital.
That's right, but we're both can claim Atlanta born.
Right.
I think unlike maybe I'm first generation Southern. My family's from actually was from Minnesota, but I was born in Atlanta. I grew up in Druid Hills, Candler Park, on the east side. Spent most of my career living on the east side of Atlanta, but I've always been deeply inspired by so much of the leadership that's come out of the West Side, changed our country, changed our world. Certainly, as a personal hero, Dr. Martin Luther King. And so part of what brought me back to the West Side is that Atlanta realizes its full-on kind of destiny is such a leading city. It is to be part of taking inspiration from that history to make sure the West Side can be all it can be.
For those who don't know, Dr. King lived on Sunset, which is on the West Side. When he passed, when he was murdered, that's where he was living, he and his wife, his family. John lives on Sunset now. So in fact, I have to tell that story. I've known John particularly from his work back when he was doing the Atlanta Committee for Progress. So I would see him out in different places and cocktails and things like that. And my family and I, we were in the middle of trying to find a new place to live, and we ended up talking, and John was doing the same thing. And I said, where are you looking? He said, well, I'm looking at Sunset. So in my head, I know him because I'd always see him in Buckhead and places like that. So in my head, I'm trying to think, okay, where is Sunset in Buckhead? Because I just knew it wasn't the Sunset on West Side. And John said, no, it's the Sunset on West Side. And so that was another sign for me that I needed to get back home, because I grew up on the West Side and was in the middle of having that conversation. We need to try to find a house on the West Side. So you're one of the people to help point me back to going back home, which was one of the things I'd been hearing. When I say hearing, I'm hearing God say, go back home. And the most safe and the best time I ever had in the community was on the West Side. So it's an honor for me to be working with you and the other board members on the West Side Future Fund. But one thing I'd love for you to talk about is the early years, because now you got 10 years of tenure in the West Side Future Fund. There's been a lot of accolades given to the West Side Future Fund. Can you talk about the early days before there was really a plan that is, what it is now when I think about home on the West Side and all those kind of things?
Sure. No, thank you. You mentioned before, and I'll go back to 2013, where I was executive director of a group called the Atlanta Committee for Progress, which really is, business leaders, university presidents working with the mayor of Atlanta on key initiatives to improve the city. And going back to 2013 is when Mr. Arthur Blank then and Kasim announced the new location of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And when it was announced, they also said, given this location, the stadium neighborhoods, particularly English Avenue, Vine City, the city would be stepping up, and Mr. Blank committed some money from the Arthur Blank Family Foundation. Well, at the time, the Atlanta Committee for Progress was thinking about its next 4 years or so. And I never will forget, it was a meeting of the board, And it was some of the corporate leaders, and I think, at that time, Beverly Tatum from Spelman, others at Morehouse College, and brought up, said, what about that? We want to help on that initiative. And that led then the ACP to put together a task force thing. Well, how can we help? Like, what would that look like, especially given some of the corporate businesses that want to be more engaged in helping? And back then, Dan Halpern was chairing the Atlanta Housing Authority, and Doug Hurst, very active civic leader, owns the 90 Distributing, led that task force. But it led to, hey, it's going to take a long time. It's not going to happen fast, and we need some kind of not-for-profit to really champion these efforts. And that led, going to 2014 to the launch of the West Side Future Fund.
Wow.
And at the time it was launched, it was after an AC Atlanta Committee for Progress board meeting. All the initial board members had come from the Atlanta Committee for Progress, plus the 2 local councilmen, Michael Bond at the time, and the local district councilman. And when it first started, the first executive director, after 6 months, had to kind of leave for personal reasons. So then that's when I wanted to throw my hat in. And we can come back to that. But in the early days when the West Side Future Fund started, it was with some of our more significant business leaders and civic leaders really understanding we need to do a lot better by these neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And at the time too, I want to say this, when it was first launched, it was awareness that a lot of the West Side, it wasn't just English Avenue, Vine City, had really needed a lot more support because of the challenge. And it was always at the time reflected, hey, whatever works here, we wanted to begin to think about how that can apply to other neighborhoods, because that's always been, a little bit of the tension is why did you pick these particular neighborhoods? But
you had to start somewhere.
Yeah, you had to start somewhere, and some of what's proven true is some of what we learned to do here to get replicated. But the early days was big on dreams, like we really want to help. But in the early days, and I can come back to me how more you want to talk about it, was really trying to figure out how do we help, and what does that help look like. And the first couple of years I was with the West Side Future Fund, a lot of time understanding what are the things that need to happen for these neighborhoods to be different, especially reflecting how the residents and those who've long time called this community home, wanted to look and manifest. Because as you appreciate, what especially happened in English Avenue, Vine City, was so many people had moved out.
Yeah.
And the neighborhoods were very depopulated, a lot of blight. Unfortunately, a lot of crime got attracted because of that. And so in those early days, one of the things we worked on, and from the, besides Mr. Blank, another key corporate leader has been Chick-fil-A,
Dan Cathy,
and really put it doing a land. We started in 2016 a West Side land use framework plan, and thinking that was where we went to the community and saying, well, how would you like to develop? We spent 2 years on that, with literally dozens and dozens of community meetings. And ultimately, it got unanimously adopted by Atlanta City Council because of the unanimous neighborhood support. But that really framed our early efforts, where we championed 4 impact areas. But a key focus of the West Side Future Fund was, once we we realized what the community said is, yes, we want people to move back in because we need more people to move. But no, we don't want to be pushed out because of that.
Right.
Because we knew as more people come in, land prices go up and people can become more unaffordable, kind of the negative aspects of gentrification. And so where we really hung our hat was thinking through, okay, if we want to really focus on what community retention, what does that really look like? And a lot of our programming and fundraising has been built from that core frame. Is how do we ensure that people that are connected to the neighborhoods, people that have lived in the neighborhoods, as redevelopment takes hold, they can continue to be a part of these neighborhoods. The early days, the first couple of years was really a lot of planning and listening and putting together, what we wanted to get done, get on. And I remember too, it was early days. Some of our more significant investors, I won't say the exact who, but had just started. People were impatient. We weren't moving faster.
Yeah.
And one of those folks commented like that, made that comment in the newspaper. And I'm like, oh, geez. But part of getting it right was we had to kind of go slow before we could go fast.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's the old adage of, measure 9 times and cut once. So, you measured and measured and measured until you got really, I think, a really great model. And talking about one of the displacement vehicles that you use in terms of freezing or the tax, I forgot what we actually call it.
The Anti-Displacement Anti-Displacement Tax Fund. So we were very intentional about the name because it said what it's doing, anti-displacement.
Yes.
And that when we, going back to 2017, working with a variety of city agencies, other philanthropic partners, really took a snapshot of how people were living. And what we found out for someone like me was a surprise, is that only 14% of the households were owner occupied, meaning everyone else was a renter.
Yes.
Right? Most neighborhoods, single family neighborhoods, which these predominantly are, it's the inverse, right? It's mostly, single family. And what we learned from that was a lot of these folks were seniors and others. And what they were fearful about is when revitalization took hold, their assessments would go up, even if the government didn't raise their millage. The appraisals would go up and their taxes would go up, and they wouldn't be able to afford to stay.
Yes.
So seniors on fixed income as an obvious. So going back to 2017, the very first program we launched was the Anti-Displacement Tax Fund that said if you're a legacy resident, which at that point was 2017 or before, a certain income, we would pay all your future tax appreciation. Now, fast forward today, we've got over 130 people, households in that program. And many of these, as you know, and you know, Ms. Thelma and others who are in the program, have no intention of leaving.
Yes.
But what a great news story about that is that the average home appreciation for folks who stayed in the program has been $250,000. So while the value of their home has gone up,
yes,
their net worth has gone up, their taxes are still at the same rate they were paying in 2017.
Awesome. Okay, let's talk about a little bit. Miss Thelma is one of my favorite people too, because when I talk to Miss Thelma, she reminds me of all the people I grew up with. In fact, Miss Thelma lives down the street from St. Mark AME church, which was my home church. And she knew a lot of the same people that my mom knew and probably knew my mother. But for me, it's not just about, it's really about restoring how I remember the West Side. And to your point, there was people displaced, because we talk about white flight, but there was also black flight. And black flight happened in these communities where people who had the means to leave, they left. But they left a substantial vacancy in there, a vacuum where a lot of good, necessarily bad things kind of fell up into that vacuum, if you will. But talk about how much land that we're currently controlling and how much investments have been made monetarily into the West Side.
Yeah, no, thank you. When we, going back to 2017, we started our work, that 1 in 4 properties in English Avenue, Vine City especially, was vacant and blighted, meaning it had a structure on it that was unsafe, not fit for habitation, And so one of the early, challenges to investment, and also the market was upside down. So if you owned a piece of property and went to a bank to get an appraisal to get it financed, it would appraise so low you couldn't do anything with it, right? Just because of the depressed value. So when we started our work, we were lucky. 10 Atlanta corporations committed capital off their balance sheet where they want the money back. They don't want to make any money on their money, which is a key thing. But it shows up to us as low-cost loans. And with low-cost loans, we bought up over 50 acres of blighted vacant land, English Avenue, Vine City.
Wow.
And now in the process of, you've been such a big part of, helping get this done, along with our low-cost impact fund money, we raised philanthropy and leveraged public grants to deliver that deeper affordability and repurposing properties. But we always knew, that most of what needs to happen won't be the West Side Future Fund, it'll be other folks. But part of what we want to do is create more favorable conditions for that to happen, while also being mindful that we really are focused on that community retention, knowing that that's not the first thing the market's going to do, so to speak. It all has not been deployed yet, but we've between our impact fund and the philanthropy we've raised yet, it's close to $200 million worth of investment the last decade.
Talk about the, why does land control sit at the center of long-term equity?
Great question. And I really, working at the West Side Future Fund, really came to appreciate something I didn't really necessarily understand as well when I first started. So what is true, and I've heard you say, what's important in real estate? Location, location, location. So what is true is there's plenty of affordable homes, but not necessarily near your job center. So maybe you can buy a home, but maybe you have an hour and a half commute. When we started the work, realizing that the West Side neighborhoods are nestled next to downtown, next to Atlanta University Center, next to Georgia Tech, the Beltline, like, wow, these neighborhoods are gonna repopulate. And most of the land was owned not by the government, not by another not-for-profit, was owned by private investors. 100%, but nearly all want to make, looking to make a profit. That's the way it works. And as much as we may not like an investor, we can't go just take their property, and you can't tell them they get to sell at the price that they're willing to sell for that you can afford. And so but to drive the long-term affordability, we knew that if we didn't own the land as a not-for-profit, we couldn't control that long-term outcome. Because if a private entity owns it, they're likely always going to be incented to go to a higher and higher price, whether that's a rental or single family. So that was part of understanding we need to own more land. And part of the model I think about in what was a great story of Atlanta, and certainly it's had some unintended consequences, but the redevelopment of Atlanta's Atlanta housing stock. I know one of your Egbert Perry as a leader in that with Renee Glover, when they said, okay, these things being 100%, lower income doesn't work. Mixed use, more market rate is part of it, which has proven itself. But when we started our work, there were 2 Atlanta housing sets that were vacant to be redeveloped as mixed use. But we knew at the time that not enough land was controlled by government to deliver more affordability, right? And so that was part of why we knew we had to go buy more land in English Avenue, Vine City, to be able to deliver that long-term affordability and keep it. So, a recent ribbon cutting we had in English Avenue for 33-unit multifamily, we own as a not-for-profit. We will always keep the rents affordable, just like when Atlanta Housing owns the land, it will always keep some percent of those rents affordable.
Yeah. It's funny because what you mentioned in terms of mixed income community, that's what I grew up in. I didn't know that's what you would call it at the time, but where we lived was really sort of blue collar. I lived off Childs Drive, off of Simpson Road. But then there was a what we would call projects now. But again, didn't realize that's what it was, because it was more affordable than even where we live. But then if I took you to Hunter Street, which is now MLK, that's where black folks with money, that's where they lived. Hank Aaron lived on Hunter Street. T.M. Alexander lived on Hunter Street. Alexis Scott's family lived on Hunter Street. So it's funny to me that we're kind of coming all the way back to the basics, that we know it's not a good idea to have a full concentration of nothing but poor people living in a place. Because at the end of the day, I want to be able to see the neighbor driving in a nice car, and that it will inspire a young kid or a young person to go, what does he do? Or what does she do? And how can I get better? That's the neighborhood I grew up in. And so what I'm really proud about what we're doing at the West Side Future Fund, it's really creating that whole thing for people to come up to realize that, hey, you may start at this level, but there's people around you that can help take you to another place. So I'm excited about that. And again, more excited about the work that you're doing. And we have more to get to, but we'll have to pause for now. Next time on In the Black, John shares how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision continues to guide the West Side Future Fund and shape the future of Atlanta's West Side.
How do you help develop a community Dr. King would be proud to call home? And back to your point, the reason I live in Sunset Avenue was to go by his home where he lived with his wife, Cred, and their 4 children. And imagine if he came out on his porch with his wife and they're like, hey, John Ahmann, what did you do today? And you think about what kind of answer would you want to give him and his wife?
This has been In the Black with T. Dallas Smith. To find out how you can change the dominant narrative in the commercial real estate industry and challenge the status quo to improve the lives of others, go to tdsintheblack.com. In the Black with T. Dallas Smith is a production of Forbes Books.